Pete Hamilton coming down, taking the checkers, will be headed for victory lane in just a moment, and we'll be there with him. From Alabama International Motor Speedway, this is the Motor Racing Network.
Along with the rise of the Superspeedways and the rise and fall of factory support, there's one other engine that powered NASCAR's success in the 60s, increasing coverage from the press and the electronic media.
It was a constant job to try to make people understand what we were doing and why we were doing it. That this was a legitimate sport and was on the rise. And it took a long time for a lot of newspapers, and I guess some of the electronic media as well, to accept that.
Before 1960, race reporting consisted of an obscure column in the local sports page. Fans would often wait several days for results from their hometown track.
As far as television, unless somebody got hurt or there was a spectacular accident that somebody happened to capture on film, it was almost nil. There was no coverage to speak of from the electronic media.
One of the first organized radio efforts came in the mid-60s with the advent of the Universal Racing Network and host Bob Montgomery.
They didn't interview anybody in the pits when anybody fell out or anything like that. It was just a couple of guys in the tower talking about the race. Then a little bit later, when they could hook up stationary positions on a telephone line, they could get a driver. Half the time he was mad, didn't want to come and talk about it one way or the other. And if he did, a lot of times they couldn't talk back then. I'm not saying, you know what I'm saying, they just couldn't come across. If you said, well, you wrecked out there, what happened? The guy would say, yeah, we hit the wall. That's it, just shut up. They wouldn't say what happened or anything.
For most Americans, those early radio shows were their first exposure to NASCAR. A whole new audience appeared. In 1969, the Motor Racing Network began with less than 100 local affiliates. Today, that list has grown to over 600 stations, making MRN the #1 source of racing coverage for NASCAR fans.
Richard Petty, the Randleman, North Carolina rocket, showing the way down the back straightaway. Richard within a car length of A.J. Foyt. Foyt a lap down. Richard Petty drifts up into the third groove. Looking real good, real smooth. He heads through turn number 4. Richard Petty on his way to the checkered flag down toward the tri-oval. Richard Petty, Randleman, North Carolina, has won the Daytona 500 for the 3rd time.
The first live network TV of a Grand National event came in 1960. The CBS Sports Spectacular aired 2 10-mile pole position races from Daytona. After that early experiment, however, almost all TV coverage was filmed for air later.
Coverage consisted of 3 minutes here, 5 minutes there, cutting away to a football, basketball, whatever. And it was just bits and pieces in and out. But the excitement was pretty much there. 9 times out of 10, most of the stuff they showed was accidents and whatever.
The biggest promoter of NASCAR on TV was ABC's Wide World of Sports. They aired highlights from most of the major events throughout the 60s.
Well, this racetrack is altogether different from any racetrack in the country. This racetrack is a one-groove racetrack. It's the hardest racetrack to pass on, and it's just almost outdated for the speeds that we're running.
ABC's coverage was such a big hit, in 1970 the network signed a $1.3 million contract with NASCAR. ABC would carry 9 races, and 5 of them would include an hour of live coverage.
As it has with all other sports, television has popularized motorsports racing to where the interest that we're experiencing today is the derivative of the 1960 early television packaging and programming.
The old cliche, the good old days are gone, could certainly apply to NASCAR. To buy a race car with a bad check, only to win enough money in one weekend to cover it, would be virtually impossible today.
And back then we did it for fun more so. Not too many were doing it for a living. Most everybody had a job and was racing really for fun. And it was a fun era back. You had a lot of fun racing. Now it's all big business, and the fun's kind of gone out of it.
The great changes of the 60s destroyed some of the simple charm of the sport. That's true, but they also brought a whole new excitement, a new enthusiasm that would propel the sport into the future. Racing's attraction is speed, and in one decade, top speeds had increased from 140 to almost 200 miles per hour.
And some of the stuff that made it run better was the safety stuff. guys weren't scared to run them. They know the wheels will stay on, and the wheels won't fly off, and the steering link ain't going to break, and just a whole bunch of stuff. And when they come up with that, if you look back and see how much the speed jumped year after year, because you had better equipment.
Improved equipment could only come from the factories, and Bill France knew it. He welcomed them into his sport, but he also knew when it was time to cut them loose.
What made NASCAR was firmness and fairness. I'm not saying that all of their things has been right down the line by the way a book would quote it, but they've done one hell of a fine job. I have to give them credit for it. We wouldn't have our sport today if it wasn't that way.
In 1972, Bill France handed the NASCAR baton to his son, Bill Jr., but not before completing the next phase of his master plan. In 1959, NASCAR held 4 races on superspeedways. In 1971, 19 races were on the big tracks. Bill France's dream had become reality. A dream of racing stock cars at top speed, up on the high banks where everyone could see. The 60s marked the most volatile decade in NASCAR's history. The period began with the opening of this speedway and ended with the opening of an even bigger track in Talladega. The superspeedway era didn't come without its price, though. In 1970, Richard Petty won the last dirt track Grand National race. And in 1972, the sport's modern era began when the Grand National schedule was shortened to just 31 races. Gone were the 100-milers, a staple of the sport's early days. No longer could a race fan work all day and still see a Grand National race before bedtime. It marked the end of an era and the end of another chapter in the NASCAR story.